This is America on the Road, named Best Radio Show by the International Automotive Media Conference, and now in its 28th year on the air. Thanks for being with us as we bring you the latest automotive information from around the world. A new study shows that the move to vehicle electrification faces more hurdles than many imagine. You probably heard some of them right here on America on the Road, and Chris is nodding his head knowingly. We'll have the details on what the study found coming up later in this segment. In a related story, the transition to EVs now hinges on made-in-America batteries and on raw materials mined and processed in America. But there's only one hitch, and we'll tell you what that is coming up. I'm sure Chris knows what it is already. Also in the news, Elon Musk and Tesla got good news on one court case at least this week. And then it got more good news from the U.S. Treasury Department. We'll have the details for you a little later in the show. Some other American car companies got good news, I think, and some other car companies, not just American. In any case, I'm Jack Nerad, no matter who got good news. And with me is co-host Chris Teague. He is always good news. Chris lives at one end of the country. I live at the other. Each week we get together to talk about cars, the car industry, and how you can get the most for your automotive dollar. Chris, you're in Maine. I think the temperatures have been absolutely unbelievably frigid. Tell us a bit about that before we start talking about cars.
Well, Saturday, so this is now 4 days ago, negative 14 degrees, real temperature, minus 43 degrees wind chill. Mount Washington, which is a few hours from here in New Hampshire, minus 108, which I think is a record for the United States, if not the world.
Minus 108?
I think it was colder there than on the surface of Mars that day. So we survived. All the animals survived. No pipes froze. So we came through it. How about you?
Yeah, we're having better weather, actually. It's been relatively cool for Southern California, but that means, highs of about 60 or so. Certainly lived through that. I played a little baseball last weekend. I'm hoping to start playing baseball again real soon. So new team this year. So we'll see how that goes. I'm hopeful on that. But so much about our personal lives, right? Let's talk about cars we're going to test in this show. What are you going to have for us?
I had the perfect car for winter, Jack, the rear-wheel drive Cadillac CT-4 V Blackwing. It's a performance sedan. I can't wait to tell you about it. It's very entertaining in the cold weather.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that in a cool car. I'd love to test some Cadillacs and some other GM products myself. Maybe I'll try to set that up coming up. My vehicle was a vehicle very close to my heart, actually, the 2023 Mazda MX-5 Miata. This was the Club RF version that I was driving. I've loved Miata since it was born. I went way back, even before the birth of Miata. Mazda sounded out a few of us at Motor Trend and other enthusiast publications way back about whether a two-seat sports car was a wise thing to do. I assured them that it was, and it turns out it was, wasn't it? So we'll talk about that in the road test segment. There's a terrific guest for all of us this week, Matt DiLorenzo, who guest hosts on the show occasionally when Chris can't make it. Is our guest on the show. He is the author of How to Buy an Affordable Electric Car, a Tightwad's Guide to EV Ownership, and I can attest to the fact he is a bit of a tightwad. But he's a great guy, a true automotive expert. He's a North American Car of the Year juror, was editor of Road and Track back in the day. I think he was editor of Road and Track about the time I was editor of Motor Trend magazine. So we were friendly rivals back then. We've known each other for decades now, so I'm excited to have him as a guest. But we have automotive news for you before we have that, so let's dive right in. Let's talk a bit about this study on electric vehicles. They also talked about sustainable aviation, which is interesting in this study, but maybe we'll touch on that a little bit, although that certainly is not our area of expertise. But the takeaway from this is automakers may not be able to build as many electric vehicles as they would like to build, and consumer demand, I think even more important, consumer demand for those AVs might not materialize as quickly as anticipated because of several issues. And the biggest issue is the looming shortage of battery raw materials, which the study says, this is in quotes, is in conflict with manufacturing reality. So, these exaggerated reports of how quickly we're going to move electric vehicles could be complicated by something we've run into with conventional vehicles, and that's supply chain issues. What's your quick reaction to all this, Chris?
Well, for a lot of automakers, it's a brand new supply chain. These things don't spring up overnight. Could take a decade or more to really get, established. So, I think that combined with the fact that we just don't have the infrastructure, and then the fact that they cost a whole lot, not a whole lot, but significantly more, I guess, in some cases, that's enough to keep people away, or at least temporarily keep people away.
Yeah, this report is called the 2023 Moving World Report. It's published by the investment firm of UP Partners. So in theory, they don't have an ox to gore here, a dog in the fight, or some other animal reference we can throw at this. They do say that there's a massive dislocation between demand and supply of key materials, and those key materials are, of course, lithium, cobalt, and nickel, which are used in the manufacture of batteries. And it's a big deal. It's a really big deal because there could be a crippling shortage of this that would basically limit the number of EVs that could be produced. And we've seen what happens when inventory is shorter than demand, right? I mean, we've seen that for the last couple of years just across the auto industry. I mean, that spells trouble, I think, for EVs going forward.
Yeah, and some of these extraction operations, the mining operations, these are huge operations that take a long time to get off the ground. There are a lot of companies, or some companies, that are working on recycling EV batteries, re-extracting those materials from used batteries and re-implementing them. But the reality is that's the other side of this too, is that as the EVs age and the batteries become a thing, they have to be repurposed or recycled. So there are a whole lot of other things that need to be thought of here, not only just the raw materials, which are obviously a huge issue right now.
Right. Well, I teased a little bit about aviation, so let me just touch on that real quickly. There are some people who consider like battery-powered planes, and hydrogen maybe is a more likely fuel. What they're suggesting is sustainable aviation fuel is the only rational pathway, this according to the report, for aviation carbon emissions in the next 20 years. Hopefully we won't have to give up flying, because it would certainly change the way we do things, right? And change where we can go. Well, here's a related story, and this is out of the Wall Street Journal. Of course, the U.S. government and companies are shelling out billions of dollars to establish supply chain for batteries in North America, but it's not where it should be, that's the takeaway I got from reading this. As they go to put more electric vehicles on the road, we just don't have the ability to mine and then refine in the United States, which is what the current legislation calls for, or certainly favors, these raw materials that are used in batteries. A lot less make batteries. The raw materials are mined in Australia, China, the Congo, and Indonesia, among other places. And they're mostly refined in China. China has much more lax environmental protections, I think, and OSHA kind of protections. So this is another kind of major stumbling block, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think there's only one lithium mine or lithium production facility in the United States. It's in Nevada. So I think, again, building these things takes time. But I think the worst scenario we could find ourselves in is extracting and shipping materials all over the world, huge distances, because it adds to the carbon footprint of these cars as they're being built. So I really do hope that there is some accelerated domestic effort that we're not seeing yet on the horizon.
Right. Well, one of the things that could accelerate that, and it depends on how you look at things too, and without getting too political, I mean, this is in the Inflation Reduction Act that has incentivized North American production of batteries and electric vehicles, which I guess in theory I'm in favor of. What I'm really in favor of is the consumer getting great deals, and where the vehicles are built, less important to me in a lot of ways than subsidizing or penalizing outside overseas sources of these vehicles. This is another thing that's in there is $2.8 billion being expended to 20 companies to help them build batteries or build battery infrastructure. And I'm not certain the government, this is again my personal opinion, you might have a different one, Chris, but spending that amount of taxpayer money, I'd just rather see the market take care of this. If there's a market for batteries, let American companies compete, as they compete for everything else.
Yeah, I can see that, but I think the intention. Well, I think I could agree with you on this one, Jack. You know, the investment of all that money into these facilities, when the automakers may have gone down that path on their own via the market, as you're saying, feels a little extreme. There are other parts of the Inflation Reduction Act related to electric vehicles that I don't have a huge affinity for, mainly the fact that they can't seem to determine the rules and stick with them going forward or for any period of time. We're only five and a half weeks into 2023, and the rules feel like they've changed 5 times since December 31st.
Yeah, well, and we're about to report on that. I mean, that's our next story teed up, and it has been very frustrating. And I'm also kind of amazed that you have something that has been legislated. I mean, it's been approved, it's been signed by the president, it is law. And then you have all this back and forth about what the law really means and what qualifies for what. And I think that's frustrating to a lot of people. I think it's frustrating to lawmakers, among others, who thought they kind of, set this up in a particular way, and it's not working out the way that, some of them at least thought they had made a deal for. So there's that. But Tesla, General Motors, Ford, and Volkswagen got good news from the Treasury Department in the past week or so. They have found that electric vehicles that were not previously eligible for the $7,500 tax credit have now, suddenly become eligible, which maybe is rightful. Maybe they're correcting it wrong. It depends on how you look at it. But the difference is how they were classified. SUVs can be priced up to $80,000 to qualify for the tax credit, while cars, sedans, and wagons, I guess sedans, coupes, and wagons, because sedans are cars and cars are sedans, and they're all cars, I guess, are up to $55,000. Again, comment on this. What's your take on, and they're not even being able to figure out what car is what?
Well, so you enter 2023 thinking that you're going to get a tax credit or believing that you're not going to get a tax credit. A couple of weeks later, you find out the vehicle that you were shopping for has changed eligibility or, some sort of that. And then you hear that in March, or when the Treasury gets its act together and releases its guidance, that could change again when the raw materials, the requirements for raw materials actually come into effect. So, it's extremely frustrating for buyers. It's hard to have sympathy for multi-billion-dollar corporations, but it's hard for automakers too, because they don't know what they're going to sell these cars for. And for the dealers, I guess, this could be a frustrating situation there too. So it's frustrating all around, as you say. I just want them to, even if they reduce the eligibility or whatever, just find a path and stick to it so that we can all buy the cars and get the price that we think we're going to get. Yeah.
Well, absolutely true. Well, when we come back, we will be road testing some vehicles, and those are more finite. I mean, you can go out and buy those, and you'll know about how much you're going to pay for them. So stay with us for that. The MX-5 Miata and the Cadillac CT-4 V, two really cool cars. We'll have those road tests for you coming up, so stay with us right here on America on the Road. Welcome back, everybody, to America on the Road with Chris Teague, Jack Nerad, back with you for road test time. And we've got really cool vehicles, I think kind of performance-oriented vehicles. A lot of times we've got 3 rows or pickup trucks or something like that. But you've got a performance car to talk about that should be a lot of fun. And I'm curious as how it did in the snow.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I love cars like the Miata, 2-door coupe cars. But since I've had kids and I've spent most of my time in a car with the kids or taking them someplace, and my time driving is back is alone, the sedan is really what speaks to me. The wagon speaks to me. Performance SUVs, even in some degree, are appealing. But this car is a compact sedan, so it's a little bit smaller than it's not a full-size luxury car. So let's just say that the CT-4 V Blackwing, Jack, it's got a 3.6-liter twin-turbocharged V6 engine, 472 horsepower, 445 pound-feet of torque. Those are serious muscle car numbers from just a couple of decades ago. And in this car, it's a quick car. So we talked about it being rear-wheel drive, which is not ideal for the snow. All-wheel drive is obviously far better. But though it comes standard on summer run-flat tires, this car had Michelin Alpine. They're kind of a performance cold weather. I won't call them a full dedicated winter tire. But Jack, I have to be honest with you, I was surprised. I'd never tried these tires. I think they worked really well with this car. The temperatures, as I mentioned earlier in the show, dropped well below zero and stayed there for a couple of days. And this car just drove on and plowed on forward like there was no big deal. Didn't. I did find that they don't have the best grip when you put your foot down, especially in second gear. You can still break traction in second gear with these tires, but they're fantastic. So, have you tested or have you been behind the wheel of the CT-4 V Blackwing or even the CT-5? Either one of
I
them?
have, yeah. I think in North American Car of the Year testing, I got behind the wheel of the Blackwing, and it's an awesome car. And in some ways, oddly, or maybe not so oddly, it reminded me of my 1965 442, Oldsmobile 442. Kind of in some ways the same size and just a ton of horsepower. And it's cool to have a vehicle like that has a lot of horsepower, isn't it?
I do agree. And you're never going to argue with more horsepower, but Cadillac did a really good job here getting that power to the ground. So it's got stand-up adaptive suspension, magnetic ride control, Brembo brakes, and an a rear electronic differential. So you do get great traction out of this car in the corners and when you're pushing it hard. So pricing, which I should have mentioned to begin with, starts around 62 grand. They do make a couple of special editions for this car. Not sure how much longer it's going to stick around, but this will definitely be, this CT4 and the CT5 will be the last of their kind for Cadillac before they go electric. So those are pretty special cars. As tested, price was just under $77,000. I'm going to go through some of these options because I think they're pretty cool. So $4,900, tan and jet black leather interior. The sport seats in this car are fantastic. I'm 6 feet tall. We talk about this all the time. About 215 pounds. And even for my larger size, they're perfectly comfortable seats. They're wide enough for my body and they're extremely supportive. So a lot of great things going on with the sport seats here. My kids have plenty of room in the back. I will say though, Jack, this car is not the best family car for people with full-size car seats. Thankfully, we're past that stage, but didn't have to worry too much about it. But there would be some issues if I had to fight for a position with a car seat in the back. 10-speed automatic transmission in this car is a $2,275 option. It comes standard with a 6-speed manual. I like the 10-speed automatic, Jack. I want to get your opinion to see if you've driven it, but I found it was a little bit slow to downshift. When you put your foot down, it takes a minute to get up to speed, but everyday driving, normal shifts are quite quick. It works very well to keep the engine in its power band, especially when you're in the V sport button mode. I call it sport button because it's a big V button right on the steering wheel, but pretty responsive. What do you think about it?
I think it's cool. I think 10 speeds in some ways are, you have so many speeds to go through as you're accelerating. It's like boom, 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 boom. You're almost between gears as much as you're in a gear, which is a kind of an odd kind of thing in a way. In some ways, maybe a 6-speed or 8-speed automatic might be a better choice, but it certainly works fine.
Yeah, you probably lose fuel economy on the highway and some other things
Yeah.
there, but it is an interesting sensation when you have the exhaust open in this car and you're in the 10 and you're going through the gears in the 10 speed, because it does. The first 4 or 5 gears are very fast shift when you get through. But so this car also had a $1,600 performance data recorder, so it comes with a dash cam and track time and all the stuff there. But my favorite option is actually the $1,500 bronze wheels. This car was electric blue, which is like a bright sky blue with bronze wheels. And maybe it was just sitting against the snow, but man, this is one of the slickest looking cars I've seen in a long time. And as I was telling you on the phone yesterday, Jack, I actually have started scheming on how I can afford to buy one of these cars. I don't know that I would spec it all the way out to 80 grand, almost 80 grand like this car, but this is an enchanting car to drive. It's perfectly comfortable in daily driving, brutally fast when you want it to be. I didn't get to take it on a track. Obviously, it's not the time of year to do that here, but I can imagine, as others have said, that it's a fantastic track car. So all around a great job here. If you can afford it and you're looking for a performance car and don't want a European model, this is the way to go.
Well, I love the fact that you fall in love with these cars. You drive some of these cars, you get excited by them, and then you want to buy one. I mean, there's very few cars that I test these days that I really want to buy. But maybe it's because I've been doing this so long that I'm used to having a new car every week. And, I kind of like that smorgasbord kind of thing. Maybe it's my Swedish heritage. I don't know, but I kind of like having that. And I certainly liked having the Mazda MX-5 Miata for a week. I mean, this is a car I have loved from the beginning. As I mentioned, even before the car was introduced, I was kind of sounded out, one of the few that was sounded out about whether this was a good thing or not. I said yes, and the rest is history. That the Miata is still around, largely in the same form. It doesn't have the same body shape as it did initially, but it's still very recognizable as a Miata. And the same basic formula, which is, front engine, rear drive, small 2-seater. you could almost say borderline too small. I'm not 6 feet tall. I think I'm 5'10" these days. I think I lost an inch when I hurt my back, but used to be 5'11", and I've lost height. A lot of people try to lose weight, and I didn't try to lose height, but I did. But same basic, not a ton of horsepower, but now 181 horsepower, significantly more horsepower than when introduced, from a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. All the Miatas had that engine, and it works just fine. A 6-speed manual transmission, I think, is definitely the way to go in this particular car. I mean, this is in so many ways a throwback car. Certainly use a manual transmission. It is offered in a 6-speed automatic as well. If you want that, you're allowed. I can live with that, but I would not recommend that. The vehicle I had was kind of the Zooty version. It's the Miata Club version, and it has a lot of stuff. And I was in the RF version, which is the collapsible hardtop version. Again, I wouldn't necessarily choose that one. I'm kind of a soft top guy. I've got a two-top 1962 Corvette that the hardtop has been on it maybe 2 or 3 times over the course of the multi-decades that I've owned that car. I just like the soft top kind of thing, and mostly with the top down. And with the Miata, you can kind of just throw the top over your shoulder and it's gone. But a lot of great stuff in the club version, which is kind of the even more performance-oriented version of a performance car. It has Bilstein dampers, front shock tower brace, limited slip differential, all that stuff. It's just better for go fast. The Miata Club is one of those where it's an autocrosser / daily driver kind of vehicle, kind of set up to do a little, at least mild competition. And of course, Miata classes are all over the place. And I that's such a fun racing class because everything is so evenly matched. It's almost like match racing in a lot of ways. I just love that. But now the club models have Apple CarPlay, wireless Apple CarPlay, which makes them, kind of more modern. And you can hear that over the blast of the wind blowing past your temples with the top down. Just so much to like about this. I mean, give me your take on Miata. I'm kind of gushing here about it.
Yeah, well, there's a reason that they say that Miata is always the answer. It's one of the few remaining cars that offers a direct driver-to-car connection, and I agree with you with the 6-speed manual transmission is a much better choice in this car because of that connection that people tend to form with these cars. It's a lot bigger than it used to be, but it's still smaller than almost every other car on the road, so you get that great handling, the roadster feel. I actually like the collapsible hardtop, Jack. I think, well, at least where I live, it's nice to have the option of a little bit more substance over your head, but I agree with you. These cars are they're becoming a rarity. There are very few left like it on sale today, and I'm very happy that it's still around.
Yeah. Well, the vehicle I had also had the Brembo BBS Recaro package. So you have the Recaro seats and the Brembo brakes and all that stuff. It was a little pricey, I'd say, close to $39,000 MSRP. But still, that's well below the average transaction price of a vehicle out there these days. So certainly I would say it's a bargain. And I think you're hard-pressed to find a vehicle that can put more smiles on your face per dollar than the Miata. Not a daily driver for very many people, but I think as a second car or just a car to keep in the garage and then blast out on a Saturday or Sunday morning. And I could see driving that in the Maine highways and just having an absolute blast in that vehicle.
Yeah, the people here in summer that you see with the top down look like they're having the times of their life. So I could agree with you on that.
Yeah. And it's a car you keep for a long time, too. I mean, you buy a Miata and you probably wouldn't turn it over in 2 or 3 years. You probably keep that and, maybe under some kind of car cover in the garage for when you're ready for it coming up. Well, when we come back, we will have a special guest for you. Matt DiLorenzo will be with us. He's the author of How to Buy an Affordable Electric Car. And he'll have some, I think, pretty interesting thoughts about electric cars and where it's going. He's been tracking what's been going on with the government and subsidies and all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk with him about that and some other things as well. He certainly knows a lot more than just electric cars. So stay with us on America on the Road with Chris Teague. This is Jack Nerad back with you. And thanks so much for being with us. Stay with us through the break, and we'll be back with Matt DiLorenzo. Welcome back, everybody, to America on the Road. Jack Nerad back with you, and we have a terrific guest. You recognize Matt DiLorenzo and the name Matt DiLorenzo because he's been on the show. He's co-hosted with us, automotive expert par excellence, the author of How to Buy an Affordable Electric Car, a Tightwad's Guide to Electric Vehicle Ownership. Matt, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Great to be here, Jack.
Well, an interesting week for the automobile in a lot of different ways, right? And Chicago Auto Show unfolding before us. Certainly you're an electric vehicle expert, but the Chicago Auto Show really isn't much about electric vehicles so much as it is about very conventional three-row and SUVs. What's your thoughts?
Well, the Chicago Auto Show is a great showcase for the public, and it's now the first big major auto show of the year. And, it's a chance for people to actually see what they're going to be buying in the next 12 months. And a lot of it are SUVs. The big news here is Toyota's new Grand Highlander, which is a roomier version, three-row version of its current Highlander midsize SUV. So I don't know, it's really amazing that all this talk of electrics and whatever, people love traditional SUVs for hauling around the family and their personal transportation.
Yeah, and I don't think that's going to end. And it's, I think, very difficult to conceive of a three-row SUV, electric powered, that isn't either super expensive or has very limited range. I don't know how you get the kind of range and all the versatility you'd have from a three-row SUV with electric power these days. It just seems really difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the conundrum that the auto manufacturers face right now, is that people are demanding one thing, and they have certain expectations about those vehicles. And on the other hand, there's this big push to electrify everything. A really a case in point on where we're really headed is GM's recent announcement that they're going to do a sixth generation of the small block V8. They're spending like $900 million to retool a bunch of these plants. And that engine, although it's used in things like Corvettes and Camaros and stuff like that, is primarily the thing that drives their pickups and body-on-frame full-size SUVs, which are still a very healthy market and a source of a lot of their sales and profits.
Yeah, really important from a profit picture. And I would say of any company out there, General Motors has been emphasizing electric vehicles more so than many, certainly. And at the same time, them making this move really tells you, certainly the internal combustion engine isn't dead, right, is it?
It isn't. Even Volkswagen, which is leading the charge with the ID.4, and they're bringing in the ID. Buzz, and they're going to be all electric. They're using the Chicago Auto Show to show a facelifted Atlas, which is their three-row, midsize SUV, which has been very popular and is actually, for the company that brought the Beetle, that was founded on the Beetle, their fortunes were really turned around here in the U.S. with their move into SUVs with the Tiguan and the Atlas.
It's really been a godsend for them to go to SUVs. And SUVs that are gasoline powered, conventionally powered. And I just don't think that's going to go away. I mean, families are still going to want these three-row vehicles, these large vehicles. And as I said before, there's really, I'm hard-pressed to think that we're going to get electric vehicles that are going to have that same kind of utility.
I agree. I think that a lot of the things that we there's like the law of unintended consequences. And I've said this before, the fact that trucks and SUVs are so popular is that CAFE clamped down on big family cars, station wagons, and full-size sedans in the 70s and 80s, and we ended up with a market that split, and people with large families and wanted V8 power and body-on-frame construction, they all migrated up into the truck market, and that's where they are today. So we'll see what happens. But that's not to say Chicago isn't there aren't going to be any electrics there. This is the first time that the public will get a chance to see the Dodge Ram electric that they debuted at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas last month.
Yeah, a wild, wild vehicle. We talked about it, I think, on last week's show, on last week's America on the Road with Ralph Scheel, who is, of course, the chief designer for Stellantis. And, that's a reach-out vehicle. I'm really curious as to the consumer reaction to that because, certainly truck buyers are typically conservative. This is anything but conservative. What's your reaction to that vehicle?
I think there's two sorts of buyers in the market, and you look at some of the more popular vehicles. I mean, the best-selling vehicle right now in the U.S. is the Ford F-150. That's not to say that there isn't a subset of those buyers who like the idea of electrification. That's why the F-150 Lightning's been, a kind of a hit for them, even though it sells in much fewer numbers than the Maine F-150. I see the same thing happening here with the Ram, the electric Silverado. You see the Rivian. They're going to be large niches of the market, but they're not going to replace the broad swath of work trucks and family personal transportation pickups and recreational pickups. So it's like they got to be there because everybody else is going there, but I don't see it as being a mainstream type of vehicle. I do see, and one of the rumors coming out of Detroit is that GM is looking at a small electric pickup position below like the Colorado, so it's a true compact, small electric pickup.
Yeah, and maybe a Maverick competitor, right?
Exactly.
Ford Maverick competitor.
Which offers a hybrid as their base model. But I think that kind of vehicle could be a lot of fun and find a market, among younger buyers and more, and especially if it's much more affordable than a $60,000 or $70,000 Silverado. I think they have a chance of it selling in some significant volumes.
Yeah. Well, you, of course, are the author of How to Buy an Affordable Electric Car. You're deep into electric cars. You drive electric cars. This has been a very confused couple of months, several months, at least, 6 months. I think actually forced you to revise your book a little bit, right? Tell us about what's going on there.
Well, last summer, there was the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed, and it made significant changes in electric vehicle tax policy. So that $7,500 rebate that people were, or tax credit from the government, was no longer applied to imported electric vehicles. So you had a bunch of affordable EVs like the Kia Niro and the Hyundai Kona that overnight were no longer eligible for the tax credit. And then you have, starting January 1st, you had things like the Chevrolet Bolt, the Tesla Model 3, and then there's been some confusion over the Model Y, whether it's a SUV or a car, were suddenly
they
eligible.
Requalified, right?
Right. And there are all these new limitations. So on cars, you can't buy a car that's more than $55,000 and get the credit. You can't buy an SUV or a truck that costs more than $80,000 and get the credit. And if you make more than $150,000 a year or filing jointly $300,000 a year, those credits aren't going to be available to you. So what we've seen is these credits and being moved from helping consumers get into electric vehicles to becoming a policy that will encourage manufacturers to build electric vehicles in the U.S. and source their battery packs and minerals in the U.S. Those other more stricter requirements don't kick in until later this year. The Treasury Department's still messing around trying to figure out which vehicles qualify, which ones don't. But it's going to make buying an electric vehicle that much harder because there's going to be so much fine print you're going to have to wade through to find out, well, do I qualify for this one? Do I qualify for a local incentive? It just, if they want people to drive electric cars, they're not making it any easier for them to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems contradictory. A lot of the regulations, most recently, and certainly from the Anti-Inflation Act, while supposedly to promote green vehicles, to promote electric vehicles, in the short term, it's certainly the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, and the other interesting things are the requirements for raw materials that come from from North America or free trade partners. A lot of the minerals that we get, even though they may be extracted here, a lot of it goes to China for processing. So a lot of that stuff doesn't qualify. So now we're faced on one hand with not giving the credits because, you know, where the minerals have been processed or where they come from. And on the other hand, there have been new restrictions on mining in the U.S. They just closed off some areas in the upper U.S. To copper mining, and you need a lot of copper for an electric vehicle. So
so some of the government restrictions are contradictory, right? I mean, they're, you know, on one side they're promoting domestic sourcing of minerals, and then they're not allowing you to mine or process those. So it's kind of a catch-22.
Yeah. So, you know, my view on it is that electric vehicles are here. They're fun to drive. There are some affordable options out there. There are some that are wildly expensive, and, you know, if you're a tightwad, you're not going to be in that market. But I think there should be a measured approach. I think you have to be informed on how it will fit into your lifestyle, how much it's going to cost you, and that's the reason I wrote the book, was kind of a how-to, because a lot of people don't understand. There are a lot of significant differences between owning a gas car and electric, and this is kind of a roadmap to help them navigate to see if it's right for them or not. Right. Winter is another factor too. You know, everybody's all of a sudden discovering, oh, it's cold out. Well,
yeah, there goes your range.
It's not going to go as far.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Matt DiLorenzo, the author of How to Buy an Affordable Electric Car. Thanks so much for being with us. We look forward to having you on the show again real soon, Matt. Always great to talk to you. Thanks for being with us. It's
been great. Thanks, Jack.
And stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back right here on America on the Road. Welcome back to America on the Road with Chris Teague, Jack Nerad back with you. And thanks so much for being with us on America on the Road. We appreciate you listening to us. And it is listener question time. We try to give back by answering listener questions. We'd love to hear your listener questions. So send it to editor@drivingtoday.com, editor@drivingtoday.com. If you have a question, a comment, you just like to talk to us about the show, we'd love to hear your thoughts. So send us a message, and we'll answer your question on an upcoming show. We look forward to doing that for you. So let's take a question right now. This is from Paul in Vista, California. Paul says this: I'm looking to buy a compact SUV like a Toyota RAV4 or a Nissan Rogue. Do you have recommendations for me? Should I look at hybrids or stick with gasoline versions? What's your take, Chris?
Well, the good news is that most of these SUVs, at least in this class, come in a hybrid, and some even have a plug-in hybrid variant. So I would recommend, you mentioned the RAV4 hybrid is great, but the RAV4 Prime is also very good. Depending on your commute, could be more economical. If you have an in-town commute, you can rely on that all-electric range and not have to stop at a gas station. Excuse me. The same thing with the Hyundai Tucson plug-in hybrid, also has the all-electric range. And finally, the Honda CR-V, just standard hybrid, is a very good SUV. It's actually more fun to drive than the standard gas version. But even as we said all of this, Jack, I think that if you really wanted to go for it, the gas versions of all these are pretty excellent too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of like the Nissan Rogue, and they're going a little different route with a 3-cylinder engine as their base engine. And, you know, I think that's an interesting choice. Toyota gives you a lot of choices. Of course, the RAV4 is one of the most popular vehicles in the United States. And, you know, it's a vehicle that, you know, I certainly endorse. My daughter has the previous generation RAV4 that, knockwood, has been, you know, just lights out good. I certainly recommend that vehicle. The hybrids, I think, are becoming less price premiumed against the standard gasoline vehicles, which makes them a better buy. I mean, you kind of have to balance that out about, well, you know, if there's $2,000 or $3,000 in difference in purchase price, I mean, that buys you a lot of gas. And the fact that, of course, hybrids use gas, you know, it's not like they don't use gas at all. Plug-in hybrid maybe is not going to use a ton of gas, but then you have a much higher price premium for those vehicles. So, and for some reason, and maybe it's just the price, a lot of people are shying away from some of these plug-in hybrids. On the other hand, the Toyota RAV4 plug-in hybrid is so popular that it's hard to come by and very high priced.
Yeah, you actually are seeing some dealer markups on those. They're so hard to come by. They're very, very desirable. But I forgot to mention the Rogue earlier. I do like it. It's got one of the nicer interiors in its class, which is surprising. But it does. The Turbo 3 is every bit as capable as the four cylinders and a lot of these others. The interesting thing I'll say real quick before we go to the next one is the equipment levels on these at the base level are very similar to, if you look at them, but the price point, the RAV4, the Rogue, the CRV, the Tucson, they all have a standard suite of safety features. They all have, I think they all now have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and touchscreens. I think Honda fixed that with the newest version. So they're all pretty close to each other in terms of equipment. So it really is a term, it comes down to taste and brand, what brand you really prefer, because they're all pretty good.
Yeah. I think the Honda CRV is one of the largest. If you're looking for a large interior size, big accommodations in this vehicle. I mean, and the CRV is also brand new this year, so worth taking a look at for that reason. One we didn't talk about is the Kia Sportage, which is now kind of climbed right into the middle of the class. It's the same size as the CRV. I think a good deal, and is available, I think, also in a hybrid as well. So good ones to look at.
Yep.
Well, let's take another question. This is from Kevin in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And Kevin says this: I think I read somewhere that EV batteries lose some ability to hold a charge over time. I don't want to pay for 300 miles of range and end up with a lot less. Can you help me understand this better?
Without being a battery scientist, I will just say this. So if you buy a new phone, a new iPhone or Android phone or whatever, after a couple of years, you notice the battery doesn't quite get you through the day anymore. And the same thing is true with the lithium-ion battery in your electric vehicle. A little while ago, Electrek, which is a very well-respected electric vehicle and all things technology publication, studied several thousand EVs. They found a little bit more than 2% battery decline per year. So for a 150-mile EV, that's like 17 miles after 5 years that you would lose over the course of that period. So things like fast charging repeatedly, your driving style, how cold it is when you charge, and all sorts of those things can play into this. But the good news is the automakers are covering this with a minimum, 8-year, 100,000-mile electric battery warranty. I think California requires 10 years, Jack, if I'm not incorrect.
Yes, some of them do, but some of the warranties don't have limits on how much decline in overall range then qualify. They'll say, okay, if it goes down to 80%, well, that's okay. But if it goes down below 80%, then we'll start to warranty that and warrant that and pay for that. And what this leads me to wonder, and it's probably not for people who buy these EVs new, but people who are maybe looking to buy a used EV, what is that EV going to be like in terms of range at the 7, 8, 9-year-old mark, for example? Probably a lot less range or significantly less range than initially. And, none of them are bowling us over with range initially, right?
Yeah, I think we may see, and I'm saying I think, and there's absolutely no guarantee behind this, but automakers are starting to include a lot more technology to protect the battery as you're charging and using it. So these things called like state of charge buffers. So you can't charge it all the way to 100%, nor can you deplete it all the way to 0% without some intervention there. So it helps protect you and helps to protect the battery when you do, or when you're at the extremes of the charge. And then also the cooling, right? So there's like liquid cooling or liquid heat pumps and things like that can preserve the battery as you're charging, or prepare the battery more completely for charging so you don't wear it so much. So I think some of this is going to improve over time, but I mean, it's a real concern, but a couple of percent a year, Jack, I mean, if you're buying one brand new, by the time you get rid of it, how much is that really going to impact your daily drive?
Yeah. And it could impact it significantly or maybe not at all,
Yeah.
Depending. I mean, if you buy a Nissan Leaf with, not much range to begin with, and then it goes down, 17 miles, that's a big issue. If you buy something with 350 miles of range and it drops to 300, maybe that doesn't bother you at all. It kind of, all of this stuff is very individualized, isn't it? I mean, much more so than with a conventional gasoline powered car.
Well, it's a lot of fun to talk about, because we have science telling us how these things should work or how these things are projected to work, but we're not really deep enough into a lot of these electric vehicles, other than Tesla, maybe, to see how these things start to play out over time. So we use the word interesting a lot, but I think this is one of those things that is very interesting to talk about and think about.
Yeah, fascinating in a lot of ways, and we'll see how this unfolds. Well, here's another question. This is from Bill in Round Rock, Texas. We're torn between looking at minivans and 3-row SUVs. Do you have a preference? What would you recommend for our family of 5?
Well, I have a family of 4 and a giant dog, and I'm going to go against the grain of every American car buyer ever and say buy a minivan. If you have people and gear and stuff to load into a vehicle, minivans are low to the ground. They have gigantic doors. The seats, most of the seats in all the models now move around, so you can take them out, configure them, fold them flat, and still carry people while you're carrying large items. It's really hard to beat the utility of a minivan, Jack. And I mean, 3-row SUVs, they're more stylish. A lot of them are sportier now. You can get like really fast 3-row SUVs. And they're more appealing, I'm not going to lie, but they're also more expensive, and they're not as useful when you have a large, like I said, large number of people or just stuff to carry around.
Yeah, my take is a little different because I would say buy what your wife wants to drive. If she wants an SUV, even though I've got to believe a minivan is more practical. And I 100% agree with what you've just said about minivans versus 3-row SUVs for a family. And I've got a family of 5, although my 3 children are now grown and mostly out of the house. But, we grew up with 3-row SUVs, and my wife wanted an SUV. She didn't want a minivan. And as practical as they are, and all the kind of rational things suggest buying one. We have a Chevy Tahoe that we've loved forever, kind of kept it forever too, and it's just been a terrific vehicle for us. So I don't think you'd suffer with a 3-row SUV, especially a large one like that. Not the greatest fuel economy, certainly, but a lot of good choices out there. Minivans, super practical, super cool in some ways. The new ones with hybrid powertrains, great gas mileage on top of everything else. But, like you say, there's something about an SUV.
Well, I said all that about a minivan right after having bought a 3-row Volvo XC90 just a couple of years ago for our family, so which my wife loves driving. So I guess it really, like you said, is personal preference, but there's no denying the minivan's utility.
Right. Well, that sums up our show for this week. Chris, I love having you on the show. Love talking to you each week. Great insights. Thank you.
I love being here. Everybody, I'll tell you, if you like what you heard, please check out the sportsmapradio.com website. There you can find us on Saturday's schedule. You can find our podcast on all the major platforms. You can also find a radio version of the show, Jack. I also want to mention yourtestdriver.com. If you're looking for reviews, news, guides, we have all sorts of new guides there. I just put up one yesterday on yo-yo car deals and making sure that you're leaving the car dealership with a car that actually belongs to you. So check it out, yourtestdriver.com. Jack, again, great to be here and love talking to you every week.
Yeah, well, love talking to you, Chris. And I'd like to point out my newest book is out there in the wild and doing pretty well. It's a crime thriller called Dance in the Dark. It's available on Amazon and both Kindle and paperback editions. So look for that. It's right over my right shoulder here, Dance in the Dark. Kind of a fun read, I think. So look for that. Thanks for listening to America on the Road on this radio station or on this podcast. We're available as a podcast on all the top podcast platforms. So join us again next week for another edition of America on the Road. I think we're done. Right. So maybe you can take a nap.
Actually, Jeff Young's just sent me some work to do. So no rest. I will sleep tonight, I hope.
Yes. Good for you.
Safe travels.
Next week, maybe we need to talk about next week quickly. I think Monday is my only window of opportunity. I'm traveling Tuesday through Thursday, and I'm kind of reluctant to try to do something on a day I'm traveling. I think I travel.
Yeah, Monday works for me.
Yeah, so I will come up with a time. It might be, I have something to do on Monday morning too. It might be, can you go much later than this? What is about as late as you can go on?
Well, I can do almost any time. The problem is at 3 p.m. So noon your time for about 40 minutes. I'm tied up to get the kids from school. But other than that, I'm pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we go that. I'm thinking maybe we would start at 11 o'clock my time, which is 2 o'clock your time.
That works, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's striking me as fairly logical to try to do so.